Hey, what's up, viewer? Welcome to Day 13, Hour 2 of Nebulous live development, and I have decided to put aside rendering for now in favor of developing more game mechanics in a prototypical fashion. I've spent like 10 days now trying to do rendering and I've barely done anything, and in the first week I got a pretty good amount of stuff done by just not worrying about graphics and working on what the game is supposed to be. And I've made a lot more progress doing that. And it also felt better doing that kind of code. Doing the rendering code has not been working as well, and it has felt crappy, and it just hasn't been bringing itself forth in the same way. So I've decided for now to go back to working on the game prototypically in order to vie for some kind of extra support for the game. And once I can get that support, I will be able to focus on graphics a little better, I feel like. Or at least get so much of the game done that there's really nothing else to do but graphics. So for now, I'm just putting it aside. Alright, so as I was messing around with this, I came up with a way to use the spline to generate a galactic arm of nebula, which looks something like this. And it's a little bit screwed up right now. But if I take a look at the scene view, more or less, it depends on the settings I use, but this is a spline. The idea is I could possibly, I'm actually going to try real quick. If I duplicate this spline, and it's kind of weird where it says it's starting. It says it's starting way over there. And I just rotate it by like 180 degrees. Can I then arguably have a... So now I arguably, if I extend it once or twice, I arguably have a second arm also. Which isn't what I'm worried about right now, but... Okay, so I can change the amount of nebula. Oh, but I can change the amount of nebula, but it can't exceed this. So the max right now is 6, so I'll just bump that up. Take a look. And I've got to fix the camera going to the wrong spot, which I was trying to work on earlier. Right, and I need to fix it to where I can, in game mode, actually select these. Oh, I actually can here. So I can select it, but it's not changing its... Okay, so it needs some work, but this was the original idea, basically. Is to have the spiral arm filled with nebula, and then inside of the nebula start spawning systems, basically. And I'm going to keep it on 2D for now. So to do that, I was using this arm spline, which if I click on this, I can actually show where the spline is and alter the spline. Eventually I'm going to, like, there's probably some kind of math for quote-unquote accurate spiral, which I can use in here. And then there's also eventually some other math that can be used to help generate the mesh to actually give volume to the arm. And then within that mesh volume, have it be like transparent, and then have nebula dispersed throughout the arm, which change the color of the arm in those places, basically. Alright, so one problem I was having is the camera keeps starting over here, even though, and it is the main camera. So for some reason the main camera is not changing itself properly. And the reason I came up for that is I'm pretty sure it's because I went like this, and it stopped being a reference, is my best guess. So I ended up coming in here and copying this, and the idea would be to come down here, and I'm just going to manually set these to camera.main. And let me take a look here. So this is irrelevant now. Basically these 3 lines are not relevant. Okay, wait a minute. So now hold on, I take that back. Okay, so let me yank this, and then come in here and have to do camera.main. And now I can set it up to where it will multiply it'll do the math on this position to do the rotations. Set the camera to that position, turn the camera, and then move the camera back by range defined. However, when I was doing this, it was rotating it incorrectly. The idea is that the camera would start more like right here. Okay, so if this works right, it should just drop itself back, straight back. But it's not. It keeps not doing that, actually. It's just very literally not doing this. So I'm wondering if I have the script is on here. It has a value. The galaxy starts or whatever. I mean, it's okay, I guess I missed this stuff here somehow. So I can't rotate it until I've done camera.main.transform.position equals vector3.0, and then camera.main.transform.translate vector3.back. And then from here do the rotation. I'm not sure which space it defaults to here, so we are assuming its own. Oh, but if it's in its. Okay, in this one we're not going to assume that. We're going to assume this is a world space. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, world space on this one. And then I guess it doesn't. I guess we don't even have to do this. This can just be vector3.back. And then this will do the rotation. This will set the new position, and then this will look at 0, and then this will back in its own space. So now I should be 1 unit back, or 25 units back from the disk on the horizontal plane, Okay, so now it's working properly. So now I need to grab the actual values and say like 15 degrees up, 45 degrees over, and maybe 25, maybe not. And I was explaining in another video that I decided to steer away from Cinema Machine because I still don't understand it well enough to actually take advantage of it properly. And it was just kind of getting in the way pretty hard. Okay, so that's closer. I don't think it's horizontal enough, or I don't think it's vertical enough. I also have this issue where I have to fix the camera panning. Because the camera is panning in personal space, not... Or it's panning in world space, not personal space. So that I have to fix that also. And then I guess it rotates... like this. I'm going to set it up to make that camera range value be dependent on some game math. Okay, so that's more correct. It's almost too far, I'd say. You know, it's not even zoomed out enough, so 55, 25, 35. Cinema Machine might be able to actually fix this by default, but I don't know how to. Okay, so that's close. This is why the range, having the range be automatic is important, because it will just feel better. Okay, so let's try like 45. Yeah, this needs to go down to like 20. And the range is fine. But if I change the number of spiral arms with the size of them, they'll have to change the camera range, but... So this is where the player would be checking out Galaxy View. And the pan's okay from this angle, so I guess that's alright. Alright, and we're going to go back to... So generate galactic disk. Yeah, I think that's still correct. I'm going to go back to... I wonder if I can make this a prefab. Alright. So I can, in fact, make this a prefab, and... I can tweak the generate galactic disk. I better make a second mono behavior. I'll call it generate galactic arms, since I'm assuming I'll be doing more arms in the future. For now, I am simply going to do a very straightforward actually, this kind of makes me wonder how this is actually going to look. So let me just say instantiate arm spline prefab. And that's basically the exact same thing as just having one existing. So real quick, if I do a run here, we should see the disk and the arms again. The only thing I would want to tweak is maybe make it to where I don't see these by default, but the truth is that this is just a starting block to get to the next step, which is to say, under Galaxy, where did I have that set up? Oh no, wait a minute, hold on. Okay, so I'm completely confused now about, is it on here? Spawn nebula. So I'm gonna move this to 1 for now. And in fact, I kind of feel like let's just set this to 1 now. So if I play mode, I'll just get 1 nebula, which is what I'm going for. except for I'm getting an error here, which is saying that okay, so I don't have a active player scanning radius. It's a little janky, but basically just have to use an if here. So it must not be equal to null, and if it's not equal to null, I can run all this, basically. Which means it's probably going to break somewhere else also. So let me take a look. And so I get why that's happening, I suppose. So now we're down to one nebula. We need to fix the nebula to change its color when it's hovered. And then upon selecting the nebula, okay, so now it's not freaking out. Oh, whoops, and the arm spline, I need to make sure that I parent the arm spline to the galaxy object. And let me see, generate galactic arms is on this, correct? Yes. So I can just say transform. Alright, and then... Okay, so I had that working earlier where a nebula will basically change its color on hover, more or less. So let me check. I was under the impression I already had that. Set up somewhere, but and I guess I'm just gonna make a new one. So just change color on hover, pretty straightforward. And we effectively just say on mouse over. It says it's called every frame, which is lame, but so is there a... Oh, wait a minute, that means there's... I think that means I can say on mouse enter. Okay, good. So use it to change its color somehow. So and I'm not exactly using a shader, so I can just set this color to something else, and the color I was using was color.blue. And then if it's on exit, then it needs to go back to its default color. but only if it's not active selection. So I almost feel like this is requiring a player data reference. Player data equals game object dot find. This is lame because it's every single game object. Oh well, whatever, I don't care. Game object dot find player data. And then from here we're saying get component player data. And we effectively have player data now accessed. So well, from here that was just very simply going to have a value for toggling if so basically like if player data.current active selection is equivalent to this.game object. Oh, so I can say game object. So the current active selection is in fact this nebula. Oh, if it's not equal to. Because if it is equal to, then we in fact do not want to change the hover color. And we also don't want to change its color on exit, so we effectively have to do the same thing down here and say if it's not active selection, revert its color. If it is not the active selection, change its color to blue. Okay, so now we just have to come up here and say color, base color, basically. And then come in here and say base color equals get component mesh renderer dot material dot color. And if we exit it, we essentially want to reset this to base color. But only if it is not the current active selection, because if it is the current active selection, then something else is changing. It's going to be handling its color changing. And this creates a lot of extra references to player data. So I don't know if that's good design long term or not, but for now, I'm going to just go with it. And I will have to slap this on the nebula. So let me open up this prefab editor and then just put this change color on hover script onto this. Alright, and let's see if this works or not. Once it can finish its compilation. We're getting an issue with alright, so that means I might be screwing it up here too. Okay, so let me check. If I grab these three and say shared material, and then come down here and once compilation is complete, go back into the what was it, galactic arm spline and change the nebula count to 3 real quick, and then I think everything else was the same. Okay, so I'm going to spawn 3 of them, And since let's see if it gives the error first. It still says it doesn't have the right color. Okay, so I guess okay, I'm gonna have to rethink of this since it's using a shader graph. Effectively, I have to. Or wait a minute. Yeah, shader graph nebula shooter. So I have to like. Okay, I'm actually not sure about this. Let's see here. So there's the material. And then there's the color, which it's saying this shader. It's saying the shader graph does not have that. So let me see whether I can get color. Has color. Set color, but that's not correct. Constant buffer. So shader. Does this have a color? Not really. Okay, so the only thing I can imagine then is get color. Or get okay, so if I go back over here and take a look at the nebula shader graph, the problem here is that oh, I actually am using I already am using a condition for that. I forgot about that. More or less just need to grab this base color. And I suppose it is just white then, huh? I'm just white is the color, whatever. So I guess I can just go like this. And just yank out the base color part here completely. Alright, and I will close the shader, since it's not really using it. Spawn this and see if it fusses about it or not. And it's not working. So it should be turning blue on hover. And here's the other spot where this is not working, so if player data dot active scanning radius object is not equal to null, oh, and I guess in this instance I can just use the null coalition operator. Alright, so the issue here is that the on mouse on hover is not working, so let me see if Nebula has a collider. It does. Uh-oh. And the null collection didn't work anyways. Lame. So only if this thing exists, basically. I actually want to go like this. So now we're still looking at it behaving strangely whenever I try to hover over it. Change color on hover. Let's see. It is. Okay, so I guess I can probably fix this if I just open up the shader graph and add a new property. So is active selection or this one is hovered. And we more or less have to branch a branch now, if I'm not mistaken. And we effectively have to say they're different is the thing. So I kind of consider this logic through the graph here. So if it is hovered and it is not active selection, sorry, I just had a serious lapse there, my bad. Okay, so if it is the active selection, it's already branching based off of that, but it needs to branch further than that. Okay, so if it is not active selection, then it just goes white. If it is hovered, okay, so if it is, let's just do this as one block. If it is hovered, or excuse me, if it is not hovered, we're looking like this. If it is hovered, we're kind of doing this again, but we're going to use like blue, basically. And If it is hovered, we want to use blue. Okay, so now I think I can use one more branch here. And the branch output is the actual base color and the emission value. And basically, if it is active selection, we use these colors. If it is not active selection, we base it off of those colors. So if it's not the active selection, it will depend on hover. And if it is the active selection, hover does not come into the picture. Okay. So I have to go back into my thing here, and once again, I want to try one more time. Well, actually, okay. So first, I'm going to try it like this and see if it breaks. But basically, it's shared material dot set. Oh, wait a minute. No, I don't have to set the color. I don't have to do this. So all I have to do is say shared material dot. I think I can just say set float. Or hold on. Set int. Set integer. I can't remember which one it was. Let me take a look here. So on which script had it? The other script was, which one? It was it on selection or was it on? It might actually be under here. So under this we were doing so on click. Oh, okay, so it was just using set float. So I'll just use that here. It might be able to use an int, but I'm not going to buy. And it is hovering with, we have to use the string name with an underscore at the beginning. We're setting it to, oh crap, now I can't remember. I think 1 is true. If it'll compile, I can take a look. If player data, current active selection is not equal to null. If it is equal to null, then 1 is true. I'm rather sure. And then just do this here. We're setting it to 0. All right, and now it should in fact work. And it is in fact not working. So that works, but enter exit is not working. So really quickly, let me test if trigger collider fixes that. And it doesn't look like it. Alright, so did I mess up my shader? Oh, wait a minute. So I said is hover. Did I type that wrong in the script? I did. It's one of the reasons why string binding for properties is not perfect necessarily. And real quick, something that's irking me, I'm going to actually change something in my UI real quick. I am going to take the research window and set its default display to off. And the same thing for the active selection readout. And to default it to off. And then something about changing the text to also say research and whatever over here, info or whatever. Okay, so now is it gonna work or what? Okay, sweet. Oh, but see, that's the problem I was thinking, is that it's using a shared material, which is incorrect, which is why I did the test with 3 nebula. So I need to come in here and say material. I think this will actually just grab the material on each of the individual nebula. Okay, good. And to further test, if I select this nebula and leave the nebula and go back in, nothing screws up, and these two still turn blue. I can click this nebula, and that's weird. So let me see this. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. Not the bug I'm interested in having. So why is that happening? Okay, so when I mouse over and then click, it isn't... Oh, well, hold on. So if I mouse over and click, I have to basically it goes that's super strange. I wonder why it's doing that. What if I select out here? Okay, it's still blue. Man, that's weird, yeah. Incorrect. For some reason, it's like defaulting it to like its old color or something. Oh, you know what? It's the shader. So basically what's happening is hovered is getting toggled, but not untoggled. So it's not about the callback, it's about the shader not working properly. So I think I know how to fix it. We can go back into player selection, whatchamajig, and we have to come in here and basically say is hovered. Equals false now. If there is a different selection, okay, so if there is a selection, it's now the active selection, or technically saying it's not hovered, even though it is. And I should fix that. That way, if I then go and select a different one, alright, hold on here. So if there is a current active selection, that means we've left-clicked on it already. If current active selection is not equal to null, it's already been clicked on. Which means it is the active selection. Wait a minute, okay, so I'm trying to make sure I really do this correctly. Oh no, this is correct, okay. Sound like a dog just scratched at my door. So, in a couple minutes we're going to have to go check on that. Yes, this is correct. I know why this is correct. If there is a current active selection, it is, for a split second, saying that the current active selection is not the active selection anymore, and it's also saying it's not hovered, because right after that, we are assigning a new, potentially, current active selection. And that object is getting it is the active selection is getting set to true. But we really want to say that it's is hovered is getting set to false here as well. Because it had to get hovered first to become the active selection. So I think this is possibly enough. Okay, so blue, 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 yellow, blue, blue. If I select this, that goes to white like it should. If I select this, it goes back to white. Okay. And okay, so that's all working properly now. It's just a slight visual feedback. Alright, so now we have to consider something else. And what we have to consider is that a galaxy in reality is estimated to be like 1,000,000 light years across, or 100,000 light years across. I can't remember which one, but nebula are tens to thousands, or tens to hundreds of light years across, whereas the entire galaxy gets into the hundreds of thousands. So more or less what I have to do is generate the galaxy like hundreds of thousands of meters across, and move the camera back hundreds of thousands of meters and increase the range to like hundreds of thousands of meters, more or less. And when you're panning the camera, it'll seem normal. Or like, it might not be clear off the bat that it's literally like that, literally hundreds of thousands of meters or whatever, but essentially the nebula gets to be, or I guess we can start off with like 100,000 meters for the width of the galaxy, which is going to put the nebula at maybe 10,000 meters. So then if you quote-unquote go inside of a nebula, you have effectively zoomed in 10 times, basically. If it's going from 100,000 to 10,000 nebula. So then your field of view needs to get 10 times smaller. But inside of that field of view, you can now have multiple stars. And so the 100,000 to 10,000, which almost, 100,000, 10,000. Which means that you can only have 10 nebula wide in the whole galaxy with that ratio, but for starting values it's probably okay. Which means if we're looking at a 10K nebula size, the next step down would be what, 100? You're almost looking at 1,000 meters for star sizes. But I could possibly lower that even further, and I could possibly have 100,000 down to a nebula size of 1,000 by 1,000 by like 100 or something, or however much it would be. And then within that space, you could have like a couple stars that are in the tens of range, but I don't know if that's correct. So I guess kind of what I'm feeling is maybe 1 million for the galaxy. 1 million meters across for the galaxy. 10,000 meters across for each nebula, which is effectively 100 times smaller. So it's 100 by 100 times nebula. Could be in the galaxy, but aren't going to be. But that's the scale. So 1 million down to 10,000. Down to star sizes that are about at where I've got them. Which is almost, and I could even double them all basically to fit them into closer to 1,000. Because the biggest one would be like, even if I double it, I think it's only at like 700 meters. So you're gonna like a 10,000 nebula, and then you got like a handful of dispersed stars that are like 700, 800 meters, and then the planetary bodies wind up being tens of meters, basically. And from there, you essentially can just instantiate them all. You just instantiate them all, and then what you can do is, this sort of center machine will come in handy. You can set up a default virtual camera position on the nebula, and basically whenever the nebula is an active selection and you choose to go into that nebula, it can actually do a transition from the galactic view, and it can zoom down just using Cinemachine into the nebula view. And from there, the player will, essentially what will happen is the player is now one step removed from selecting a different nebula, because they have to zoom out and then select a new nebula. So basically, the game only has to now think about planets inside of this nebula. So it can have all the stars ready to go, and it can have all of the celestials ready to go for this planet in particular. And in the event that it zooms out, then what it does is it like stops caring about the planets and the celestials, keeps the stars in memory, but then loads the stars for all of the other nebula. And if it selects another nebula, then it does the same thing. It just kind of it basically works as a pooling system. It can pool certain values for efficiency. So to get that to work, let's see here. I'm going to have to I'm missing out to scale this up super huge. And I'm trying to think about a way to set it up with some kind of algorithm. That way it will automatically change the sizes of everything. So really quickly, I'm going to actually grab the, let's see here. I'm going to drop an arm spline in here, and I'm going to see if, does this actually scale it accurately? Okay, sweet, look at that, it does work like that. So I can just basically jack up this arm spline to be 1,000,000 or something. I'm going to have to consider how I'm going to do that. But I think possibly I can just tweak their scales naturally until I find a size that basically works, as opposed to working on an algorithm for it. Alright, so that wasn't too bad. Let's see where I'm at here. Alright, so I managed to do a few things. I fixed the hovering. I fixed the camera a little bit. Now I've got to fix the scale. And once the galactic scale is at the proper size, then I've got to mesh in the nebula scales, and then I've got to mesh in the star scales, and then I've got to mesh in the celestial scales. So I've got to, and I'm just going to do that by manually tweaking the prefabs. So now I'm not going to use an algorithm just quite yet. And effectively, the idea is to have a nebula that is enterable. And when I enter it, it has its stars. And each of those stars are selectable. And once they are selected, they can be also get zoomed in on, and once they're zoomed in on, their celestials are, not sure how I'm going to do that, but their celestials will be more ready for selection. So, alright, so I got a little bit done in this video, but I wasn't working on rendering, so I'm not too surprised. I appreciate you if you've actually managed to watch it this far, and can't wait to see you in the next one. Take care.